Hey everybody, thanks for joining us. I'm here with Pastor Chad, lead pastor at Freedom Life Church, and we're going over the book of Exodus, finally. And we're in our second week of Exodus, and it's been pretty good. We're already diving into some deep things, and this last Sunday he was talking about persecution of the church, and it was pretty good, and we went over some interesting topics. If you missed that, we have a link on our Facebook below that you can check that out and then come back up to the follow-up and see what we have to say about the sermon. If you missed this last Sunday, we're continuing, if you didn't know, we're continuing our just rolling on Exodus, and it's going to be, for a while. So if you miss it, go back the last 2 weeks. You can go to our website and check out the last two sermons, and then be here next Sunday at 10:30. We're going to continue working on Exodus and to the very end.
To the very end.
What do you say? When Jesus comes back.
When Jesus comes back.
Yeah. We're going to be on it until Jesus comes back. And so, this last sermon, it was interesting text. You were talking about, the persecution of the church, and I like how you brought it down to our level, being individuals dealing with persecution and stuff. Was there anything, though, out of the sermon that you left out that you wanted to bring up here?
Yeah, I will say, I guess one thing that I think I captured the idea, but I actually didn't say it. I wanted to, but I didn't say it. But the lead into this particular moment, what I find interesting is that God leads it to this place. Last week we talked about God's big story, and he's telling this story, and what I think is so interesting is that what he wants to do is the way that this story is laid out, and the way that it seems to be laid out is that God, the beginning of their kind of explosion into stepping into the reality of the covenant that God makes is birthed out of persecution.
Yeah.
And that was really the whole idea of the story, and honestly, I mentioned it in some ways. That's the whole story of the gospel, is that our hope is birthed out of the most horrific death this world's ever seen.
Yeah.
The perfect one,
Right.
gets beaten and killed as somebody that wasn't perfect, and he takes on all of that. And so it's really interesting how God works, and that was one of the things that I wanted to kind of show us in the whole sermon, is just that's the rhythm of this thing. And so That's the reason why I think we landed on ideas like we don't fear persecution then. We're fearless. We don't have to be fearful of persecution and difficulty and hardship and whatever. We don't. That's the reason why that the fear of that doesn't have to exist in us as believers, only because God tends to, he plants seeds, and then out of persecution and out of hardship and out of difficulty, we're meant to spring into life. And so I wanted people to see that. But I will say I left out two things, and there's two elements that are going on. What helps us to be fearless? Why do we do this? I left those two parts out. Mm-hmm. That's because that's the next two parts. Of the series. Those are the next two. So you have to be here.
Yeah.
That's it. You have to be here to finish the thought. We're actually going to stay in that 8 through 22 text. I think we're in 15 specifically, 15 to 22.
Right.
This next Sunday, because there's some why behind why are we motivated for this? Because I think we did a lot of just, you're meant to grow, you're meant to grow, you're meant to grow and flourish in difficulty. But there's some things like, why do I stand in that? Mm-hmm. And it was so there's a lot of that. There's a lot of the why behind that. Why am I doing that? How can I do that? How can I get my mind and my heart to agree with that reality? Mm-hmm. Well, that's the next 2 weeks. We're going to look at a couple of whys and a couple of hows. We get our hearts to agree with that, to latch on to the reality of we have been designed as believers, as the church, as individuals. We've been designed to grow and flourish in difficulty, and that God uses it for that reason, for that purpose in our lives. And so there's a lot of that we're going to explore, and we're going to stay kind of in that text, and then I think we start moving into chapter 2 2 weeks or a week from this Sunday, 2 weeks from yesterday.
Yeah.
And so we're, it's going to start flowing, that way. And so anyway, I think it's important for us to stay in the flow of it, because there's a lot of things that we're going to do really throughout the series that's going to build that way. So anyways, so we've got some why, we got some how that we need to cover, because I think my hope is that people didn't walk out going, yeah, but I mean that sounded all, that's a great bumper sticker, thanks. We flourish and thrive under difficulties, but how do I do that? Why do I do that? Well, I think we covered some of that, but a lot of it is we're going to find 2 really solid ideas over the next couple of weeks that are really going to shape how we live into that reality. And so that's why I would encourage people to, again, this is a journey. This is a flow of walking through the book of Exodus. So that's why I'm consistently saying, hey, hang with us. Because sometimes it's, you just got to hang with us, because we're going to see some things unfold, and we're doing that on purpose to help us kind of grab smaller ideas, smaller chunks, if you will. You eat it one bite at a time, this huge book of Exodus. Seeing these smaller things, but we have almost mini series within the whole series of Exodus. And so hang with us, because we're going to kind of peel back the layers and kind of see this thing unfold. And that's what we're doing here in the first part of the book as well. And so I left some of that stuff out with maybe, and maybe not, but maybe some people kind of walked away going, why or how or, what's going on with it?
Right.
We're going to get there. That's next week, and that's the week after that. So the next 2 weeks, we're going to kind of unfold that, and I think it's going to be really. And then we're going to put a nice little capstone on it, November 11th. 2 weeks from this coming Sunday. We'll put a nice little capstone on, kind of what that section, if you will, that kind of this first kind of mini series within the series. We'll put a nice little cap on it. So
well, it's good to know that these thoughts are continuing, because whenever you read the book of Exodus, it's not just a bunch of one-hit wonders. One thought.
No, it isn't.
It's different from the
right.
Ephesians series that we did.
That's right.
Because the book is different. The Ephesians series was a letter written by Paul, and Exodus isn't a letter,
right.
to somebody. This is the historical event that has happened here.
Yeah.
And so it's cool that the thoughts are just continuing throughout the sermon.
Yeah, it'll be a lot of fun. I think every book has a nice flow to it, but then there's a different approach to how you do that. I definitely agree with that. So it's gonna flow a little different. We're gonna do some moments like what we're in even here at the very beginning, where we're covering verses over again.
Yeah.
Where we're seeing a few things kind of drawn out over and over again. Whereas in Ephesians, because it's a letter, we just kind of flowed with the letter. We just kind of walked through it. We ended with this verse. All right, we're jumping in with the next verse. And Exodus won't work that way, because we're going to see a couple of things drawn out in the text multiple times. So the next 2 weeks we're in that section, and then we'll kind of break into chapter 2, and then, and so it sometimes we're going to see the same verses. I think even on the resource page, when you go to the Exodus reading plan, you're going to see that. So last week we read Exodus 1, 8 through 22. Mm-hmm. Well, this week the reading plan says read Exodus 1, 15 through 22. Well, I already read that. We'll read it again.
Yeah.
Because we're going to be in that section. You'll read the whole book.
Yeah.
But read that section again. Get your heart ready for that section.
Right.
Because that's what we're going to be talking about. And we're doing that on purpose, because we kind of want to just let this story and let things kind of come out of that story and see a flow and kind of see the heart of God for his people. So, so I think that is important. It's going to feel a little different, but that's the reason why we're like, hey, we're pulling back layers here. We're going to see some things out of the same grouping of text. And so, that's the way it will work. So anyway.
So I kind of have a two-part question for you. Okay. When you're talking about the persecution of the church and Exodus, and you're seeing their story and what's going on with them, and they believe in God, they're getting persecuted for it. Pharaoh doesn't want to do what God tells them to do. And then, even before that, though, it's like, man, they're just being persecuted for like no reason, just because they are who they are. Yeah. And can you kind of explain the difficulties of, or even kind of the contrast of what we deal with here in 2018 to what they dealt with, and maybe even from different countries, some of the things that they deal with? Because we live in America, it's different here. In comparison, it's almost like we get, a spank on the hand, in comparison to what they've dealt with.
Well, that's without question the level of persecution, or the severity, I guess, of the persecution, the ruthlessness of the persecution is obviously different. I don't know that any of us would debate that our persecution is more terrible or as terrible. Certainly not of what the Israelites are experiencing in Egypt, because we don't have that kind of environment. Right. We don't have a ruthless dictator, that can just go in and just out of sheer anger and sheer hatred can just go in and with the power of his army enslave us, and we're not chained up, or we're not making bricks, for a living. Right. We're not doing that. We're not doing that kind of thing. So I know that if we try to compare ourselves in that way, I think obviously it would be really difficult. Like, what we deal with is just, not even close to that. Mm-hmm. I would also say, today there are believers on the planet today, 2018, at the same time that we're getting our slap on the wrist, that are losing their lives. Yeah. Their literal lives are being lost because of their belief in Jesus, because that's the level of persecution they're dealing with. And so again, if I sit down and I think about that, I go, yeah, that's worlds apart, Yeah. I get made fun of. I remember being in high school. I was a baseball player in high school. The head coach was just, he berated me every week, because Wednesday would roll around, and long story short, it was scrimmage day. Well, I was a leader in my youth group, and so it was time to roll out. And that was scrimmage day, so we would practice longer that day because we'd play a whole game, an inter-squad game, and I would roll out. When it was time, I would go, I've got to go. Replace me on the field. I got to go. And he would cuss me out. He would yell at me. He would get everybody else, all the other players and all the other coaches involved in all of this. And yet I would, I just kind of march on, I guess. But I've been there. But that's a slap on the. He's not putting me to death. He's not asking everybody to stone me. Right. So that's not a thing. I remember working at a bank when I graduated and I got out of school and started working at a bank. I had a boss that was. He wasn't mean, but he'd make little jabs. It was one of those things where he was kind of towing that line between inappropriate and just, and so he kind of towed that line. So every now and then he'd make a little jab, he'd make a little joke, he'd make, he would say things to try to stir things up, and so I experienced that even in the workplace as an adult. You kind of get into that environment where somebody just really just thinks it's stupid what you're doing and what you believe in and all of that. So I've experienced that to some degree. But again, that's so far. That's a far cry between that and I lose my head. And so yeah, it's so different. And sometimes I think that's a sobering thought, and I think it's important for us to think about it in those terms. To go, man, that's a real thing. That's a reality. That what I'm going through is not what even people today in 2018 are going through. Certainly not what the Israelites are going through.
Right.
However, the one reason why I didn't necessarily bring that up is because I think what we don't want to do is let the pendulum swing so far where it's just we go, man, the hardships I'm going through, are stupid. I guess I'm, No, it's a real thing for us because it is relative to where we are.
Yeah.
And so the things that we go through are real and are hurtful and are hardships in the context of where we live. Like, we shouldn't be. I mean, where we live, we shouldn't be persecuted.
Right.
I mean, the whole premise of the thing is that I should have religious freedom and I shouldn't be persecuted in any way, shape, form, or fashion. And yet we are.
Yeah.
Every day there are men and women going to work. There are students going to school. We're going out into our world and we're being persecuted all the time. I mean, we are. If we stand for anything that's biblical, we're a step away from having people picketing in the church. We have that happening in our country, and you go, what in the world? Just because we're standing for biblical things when that shouldn't be. So the reason why I didn't want to kind of take everybody and go, your persecution isn't as big as the Israelites, and hey, your persecution isn't as big as the believers right now that are in secret churches and in different countries and stuff like that, is because I didn't want us to feel like that that we shouldn't be feeling the weight of our oppressions and our persecutions and our difficulties and that's the reason why I didn't go there, honestly, is because they are real things. We're dealing with real difficulties, real hardships in our lives, in our context. They are there. They do exist, and I wanted people to understand that even in those, no matter what level of hardship, if we do the comparison game, no matter how the hardship would be, we're meant to thrive and grow. We're meant to continue to grow. So even if that boss is towing that line, and man, he just pokes at you as much as, well, man, you're meant to thrive. You're meant to grow. You're meant to, for the purpose of showing them that you can attack and you can do whatever you want to, but I'm gonna be blessed. I'm gonna thrive. I'm gonna stand in this and multiply. Yeah. And then that may enrage them even more. Honestly, probably will. It'll enrage them even more. And then they might up their game, their persecution game. They may up that, well, okay, well then we stand and we multiply. I wanted people to feel that in their own lives rather than me making light of what we deal with in our culture by showing them that you're, because what Paul will say to everyone is that these light and momentary afflictions, he will call everybody's afflictions in life light and momentary. And that we have a hope beyond. And we'll get there. We're going to get there in the next couple of weeks. We're going to get to that section. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. But he would call everybody's. And Paul's writing in a day where people are dying in their culture right then and there. And he calls them light and momentary afflictions. Yeah. So that's the reason why I go, no, we're all kind of in the same boat. It's going to look a little different if we all sat down and compared. Well, sure. I mean, we're not experiencing that. However, we are experiencing the light and momentary afflictions. It just happens to be in our contextualized world of Western culture, United States of America. Yeah. It just happens to be in that. And a lot of the persecution that comes our way is more subversive. It's more kind of underneath. It's politically charged sometimes. It comes by different ways.
Kind of passive aggressive.
It is. It's very passive aggressive, which is very America. It's passive aggressive a lot of times. Yeah. In the political arenas and things of that sort, and the talking heads of the world. But it comes by way of very subversive, passive aggressive, kind of underneath, sinister underneath, insidious kind of concept, kind of coming up from underneath. And so we see that, so ours is dealt with differently, but Paul would call everybody's, including the people losing their lives in 2018 and us that gets the proverbial slap on the wrist, affliction, light and momentary afflictions, all of them, because in comparison to the hope that's beyond, all of this stuff is light and momentary. It doesn't matter where you land on that spectrum. It's all light and momentary, and and we're going somewhere else.
So would you say that the Christians who aren't dealing with any type of persecution maybe aren't doing enough? Because it's kind of hard to say that with like a straight face, because you're like, I want you to be going through persecution, but we don't want people to be going through struggles and hardships. But as Christians, the Bible is saying that. Well, Jesus is saying that, they hated me, so they're going to hate you. And if you're not dealing with persecution, you're not dealing with any type of difficulties, is that a concern?
Well, I said that in the sermon. I was like, hey, if you're not experiencing this, it should make you think, how is my life reading right now? How does my life read? What is my life saying? Because I do think you should be concerned, because I think that you said it a second ago, and I think we mentioned it in the sermon, I guess, alluded to it at least in the sermon, that the Israelites they're in essence just there. They're not showing any sort of aggression towards Pharaoh. Yeah. They're not talking to the enemies of Egypt. They're not doing anything but just existing. Yeah. They're just there. And Pharaoh's like, we need to do something about them, right? Yeah. And so they're just kind of there, but it's because, their worship of God is obviously separate. Mm-hmm. Pharaoh, he's his own God, in fact. Right. They're not worshiping him. They have their own God. Mm-hmm. And so they're living this kind of separate community, and that's the reason why it's so noticeable, I think, to Pharaoh, is because he sees that they're different. They're not doing what everybody else is doing, and that is bowing down to him. Right. They're not doing that, they're kind of doing their own thing over here, and so it creates this. They're different than us. They're different than me. Yeah. And so that's why I would say, if you're a believer, people should go, you're different than me. If they're not a believer, if the non-believer interacts with you, they should see you're not the same as me. Right. The way that you look at the world, the way you interact with culture, the way you work, is different than me. I'm trying to cut corners and just get by. Man, you're doing everything in excellence. You're doing things. The boss was rude right then. Why aren't you angry like me? Why are you not spouting off comments about them behind their back? Why aren't you doing that? You're just different than me. Yeah. Tragedy hits. You're different than me. I remember being at the bank where I was on 9/11. I was there that Tuesday morning, and it was like to watch the different responses to something like that in just the workplace was so drastically different from those of us that claimed Christ and those that didn't. And in that moment, then they would turn and go, "We need you." Right? Yeah. Chad, can you come upstairs? We need you for a second. And it was, we need you to pray. We need you to do something, for us. And there was this different response, and I thought it was fascinating. But that's the way it should be, is that if you're living in such a way for Christ, you should stand out. You should be something that even imaginary, the people around you should just go, man, I need to do something about this. They need to respond some way, and I think the Bible consistently puts the Christian in that spot. I think I quoted that verse of the Apostle Paul says, "Man, you're either going to be the aroma of life or the stench of death." Yeah. That when you interact with people, you're not going to be neutral to them, or you shouldn't be. So if you are neutral, if you get no pushback, you get no pushback. I think at the very least you should be concerned, and you should at least kind of look at how am I living in the workplace? How am I living at home? How am I living at that family reunion? How am I living at the holiday table, that's coming up? Right. What am I doing there? Because, and it's not to say that Christians should walk in and be needlessly offensive or stir up trouble. Because again, the Israelites weren't doing that. They weren't stirring up trouble, but they were existing differently. Yeah. They were doing things differently, and it became the stench of death to Pharaoh. They could come and then join our enemies and kill us. Right. It became the stench of, for him, literal death. Like, this could not go well. But in our culture, in our contextualized moment of that, it's, I don't get why you're different than me. I don't get why you're living different, or it's the okay, the preacher boy's going to pray now. Oh yeah, you're right. I am going to pray over the holiday meal. You might be uncomfortable, but man, I'm going to proclaim Jesus right now. Mm-hmm. And I do that every Thanksgiving. Yeah. I'm going to stand and I'm going to pray. at a house where some people may not feel that way about it, or whatnot. And so, I mean, that's the way it works. And so that's the moments that we want to take our opportunities when they're there. And so if that's not happening, if you don't have any pushback, I think you do have to at least go, what am I not doing? Because Jesus says it's going to come. You're going to have persecution, because if you're going to roll with me, they persecute me. He actually says, I brought you out of this world, and you're going to experience some things because of my name. And we carry his name. We sing about his name, and we carry his name every day. And if that's the name we're going to proclaim, he says that's going to, persecution is going to come our way. And so if it's not, you have to kind of go, well, what am I doing?
Yeah, I think that's why the scriptures tell us to take joy in the persecution and stuff, because you're doing it for Jesus. It's you're being blessed. Look at it from a different perspective. You're like, all right, someone just cussed me out just now because because like I was bringing up Jesus. You're like, okay, I must be doing something right. But
I used to laugh because I thought it was always, if I didn't get a negative email about a sermon, I'd be a little bit worried about it. Now you don't get emails very often, but every now and then I'll get a comment about somebody came and they didn't like what we were talking about. And I'm like, okay, well. Right on, man. We're in good company. Right. We're doing something right. That's it. But anyway, it's kind of a goofy way to look at it, but it's true. I mean, if you've got some negativity coming your way, if you got some persecution coming your way, if you got some things coming
because
at you
of the name of Christ,
because of the name of Christ, and that's important.
Yeah.
Because
not
of the
because
name
you're
of,
a bonehead.
But not because you're an idiot. But if you've got persecution coming your way, difficulty coming your way, because of the name of Jesus, then you are in good company. You are blessed then. Yeah. And so so that's how we can exist and stand it and multiply it. So just be okay with it. Find joy in it and just be like, look, I'm rolling with Christ. That's what that means. Thank you, And so it's that's the reason why I used the story of Craig. It was, we didn't worry about him because he wasn't.
Poor Craig.
Poor Craig. He wasn't a threat. Nobody thought of him as a threat, so everybody left him alone. And in my Christian life, I don't want the enemy to leave me alone.
Yeah.
I want to be a force to be reckoned with for the kingdom of God. I want God to use me in that way. And wherever I go, I want God to use me. But what that means is if you're going to say, I want God to use me, then you got to be ready for the enemy to cover you, right?
Yeah.
to want to keep you away from the ball, keep you away from the goal, keep you away from where you want to go. So you're gonna see the pushback if you really are going, man, Jesus, I want you to use me. I want to be useful. I want to be used of you to advance your kingdom. If you're going to do that, the enemy, the opposition, will begin to push back on you in various ways. It may come out with persecution by a boss or a coworker or something like that, or it may come out in other ways, just spiritual warfare, spiritual oppression. It might come out in difficulties in life, difficult situations in life you might have to kind of deal with, and you go, man, why is this happening?
Yeah.
Because the enemy just doesn't want you to keep advancing. And so, look, stand, multiply. And I think that was the goal of the sermon. That was the hope. So.
Well, it was great, man. I love talking about it's kind of weird, but I love talking about the persecution of the church because we multiply, because we come out on the good side. We're always on the winning side.
Right.
And so that's always cool to see. We're kind of always the underdog almost in most circumstances. And, we're not supposed to win, but then we always come out with the win. And so it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And so everybody loves an underdog story, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So if y'all missed the sermon, please go back to our Facebook, check it out there. It'll take you to our website, and you can check out all of our resources that we've talked about. There is a reading plan. There's some videos on there. I think all of our follow-ups for the previous Exodus sermons and our upcoming ones will be on that website. And so make sure you check it all out and be here next Sunday at 10:30 a.m. And don't forget that we have life groups this Wednesday at 6 o'clock or 6:30. Drop your kids off here at 6:30. Be at your life groups at 7. We have Freedom Kids and the Well Student Ministry here at the church. Drop them off here. We'll have a great time, and then you can head out to your small groups, and y'all can just have a great time there. There's going to be food, a lot of fellowship, and then just talking about our sermons in Exodus. And so it's going to be a great time. So make sure y'all check that out, and y'all have a great week. Love you guys.
See you.
Bye.